Diddy Trial Day. 22. Jane's full emotional breakdown, voice memos, and freak-offs revealed she was only known as Jane Doe in court. But behind that name was a shattered life, a silent scream, and a love that looked more like a sentence than salvation. On day 22 of the Diddy federal trial, the courtroom stood still as Jane exposed the dark rituals behind luxury hotel doors, from violent confrontations to voice messages calling her crackpipe from high-end freak-offs with celebrity guests, to the crushing silence that followed. This wasn't just a story about sex, fame, and power. This was about control. About a woman's slow disappearance under the weight of a man the world called a mogul. Today we walk through her full testimony, word by word, emotion by emotion. And by the end you'll ask yourself, was it love? Or something much, much darker? The courthouse hallway was too quiet, too still. It smelled like old wood and perfume and something metallic underneath. A strange mix of nerves and nostalgia. Jane stood by the frosted glass doors, her reflection staring back at her, not quite whole. The heels on her boots clicked against the tile as she shifted her weight, but even that sound felt too loud in the silence. She hugged her arms despite the heat, despite the fact she'd been under hotter lights in tighter spaces and with far less clothing. Behind her, a reporter whispered into a phone. Somewhere, a bailiff coughed, but Jane heard none of it, because in her ears again was his voice. That soft, deep murmur that once sounded like velvet and now scraped like sandpaper. You are the crackpipe. That's my new name for you. Crackpipe. Or should I call you CP? She remembered blinking at her phone, unsure if she'd misheard. Unsure if it was meant to be sweet, addictive, dangerous, a joke. But no one joked like that. Not unless they meant it. Not unless they saw you not as a woman, but as a drug. A thing. She never meant to love a man like him. She wasn't one of those girls, the ones who fell for power and pretended not to notice the bruises. Or so she'd told herself in the beginning. Back when Diddy smiled with his whole face. Back when he flew her out to Turks and Caicos and told her she deserved to live like a queen. Back when love contract sounded like romance, not ownership. A contract with a $10,000 apartment and 10 million unspoken rules. He made it sound like a fairy tale. But Jane had read fairy tales. The girls who wore glass slippers always bled in the end. That morning, the one after Turks, she'd woken up with the sun kissing her face. Diddy had already left the room, but the bed still held his scent. Vanilla, smoke, salt. And then the message came in another voice note. Hey baby, we had a great time. Stay in the light. You are the crackpipe. That's my name for you now. Jane had laughed, not because it was funny, but because she didn't know what else to do. It was always like this, tenderness, threaded with tension, love, coated in danger. I love you, but I own you, his messages whispered, even when he said the words she wanted to hear. Now, on day 22 of the trial, the past wrapped around her like cold chains. The jury had heard the recordings. The judge had heard her tears. And the public had heard enough to burn the internet to the ground. They knew what freak-offs were now. They knew about the contract. They knew Diddy called her CP. But they didn't know what it felt like to live it, to survive it, to come back from it and still feel like you were only half real. Her lawyer had told her not to flinch when the tapes played. So she didn't. But her hands had trembled anyway, just slightly resting in her lap where the cameras couldn't see. Jane Doe. That was who she was in court. A name stripped of a name. A woman without a face. But behind closed doors, she'd been so many things. Crackpipe, baby, bitch, queen. He'd rotated the labels like outfits. She never knew which one he'd choose each morning. Sometimes she was worshipped. Sometimes she was spit on. Always she was watched. The hallway door creaked open and a court officer gave her the nod. Her cue. Jane inhaled once. Deep. Felt the way her ribs tightened. the way her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She'd stood on red carpets, she'd stood half-naked on yachts, she'd even stood barefoot in the middle of a freak-off while strangers watched. But nothing made her feel more exposed than this. Inside the courtroom, it was colder than before. Not from the temperature, but from the stares. The prosecutor gave her a small, encouraging glance. Tenny Garagos, the defense attorney, didn't bother hiding her smirk. The jury, they leaned in slightly, as if they already knew she was about to crack open something ugly. Jane stepped up, swore in again, and took her seat. "Miss Doe," the prosecutor began gently, "do you remember the morning after Turks and Caicos?" Jane nodded. She didn't trust her voice yet. "Was that the first time Mr. Combs called you by a new name?" The courtroom was so still she could hear the rustle of fabric as someone adjusted their jacket. "Yes," she said finally. "He called me crackpipe." A gasp from the back. One of the reporters, maybe, or someone too young to hide their reaction. "Did that name feel affectionate to you?" Jane's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite pain. No, it felt possessive. Pause, and disturbing. Somewhere deep in the courtroom, microphones, her voice echoed. And in the back of her mind, the memory screamed. That last night in the suite. The way he licked his lips before calling her his favorite drug. The silence afterward when he rolled away and turned on the TV. She could never unhear it. She could never unfeel it. That's how it always started. Not with fists, with words. And words she had learned could leave deeper bruises than anything. The private jet had smelled like roses and Moet. Jane remembered walking on board and feeling for the first time in days like she could breathe. No cameras, no threats, no Diddy. Just champagne flutes, a designer throw blanket, and the dazzling voice of the rapper's girlfriend laughing across the aisle. It wasn't supposed to be a betrayal. It was just a birthday trip, a distraction, a gift. At least, that's what she told herself when she texted Diddy a vague excuse about content meetings in L.A. She didn't say Vegas. She didn't mention the jet. She certainly didn't mention the icon, whose name the courtroom still wasn't allowed to speak. That night, Jane wore a silver slip dress that hugged her like a second skin. Her makeup shimmered under the lights. Her hair coiled down her back in loose waves. They went to a play, then a high-end dinner, then the club. By the time they reached the sweet penthouse strip view mood lighting, she was more curious than nervous. Until she saw him, Antoine. He was laughing, shirtless, moving with ease, just like he used to, just like in those hotel nights with Diddy. Only this time, he wasn't there for her. He was there for the show. Jane stood frozen in the doorway as she registered the scene. Antoine naked, performing for a faceless woman on the sofa, the rapper seated with a drink watching with open amusement. His girlfriend curled beside him, hand resting casually on his thigh. They made no effort to hide it. No shame, no tension, just decadence. The kind Jane once mistook for intimacy. You coming in or just judging someone teased? Jane blinked, smiled politely, stepped inside, but her body tensed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The suite smelled like sweat and smoke and something heavy beneath the surface. Bass thudded from invisible speakers. Every surface gleamed. She recognized the pattern, not just of the room, but of the ritual. This was a freak-off, just not Diddy's. She kept to the corner, drink in hand, not sipping, watching. It felt like déjà vu, the kind that claws at your gut. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife, the rapper looked over and smiled. "Didn't know you'd be here," he said, raising his glass. Jane returned the nod. "Didn't expect to be?" He moved toward her slowly, not predatory but purposeful. "I always had a crush on you, you know." Her breath hitched. "That's so." His smile widened. "Always wanted to F you." There it was. A whisper made of fire, a threat dressed in desire. She didn't answer, didn't need to. She turned away, pretended to check her phone, pretended not to notice when he kept looking, pretended most of all that she still had control. Later that night, the air thick with heat and laughter, Jane made a mistake. A small one, a stupid one, a flash, a dare. She lifted her top just briefly. A joke, a dance, a drunken echo of old habits. But she saw it in their eyes the moment they stopped seeing her as a guest and started seeing her as a possibility. She left before dawn, alone, cold, furious at herself. She told no one, not until court. When Diddy found out, he wasn't angry. He was volcanic. According to Jane's testimony, he'd screamed, demanded details, called her filthy, accused her of betraying him with his people. She tried to explain that she hadn't done anything, hadn't touched anyone. It was a party, she said, not a performance. But Diddy didn't believe her. He never did. Later in court, the prosecutor asked, did Mr. Combs say anything specific about the party? Jane's voice was steady. He said, how could you go to another man's freak-off? Gasps again. Pens scribbling, the jury leaning forward. It wasn't just jealousy. It was ownership. Diddy's defense lawyer, Tenny Garagos, tried to trap her with her own memory. You went voluntarily, didn't you? Yes. You took the jet. Yes. You undressed even just for a moment in front of the guests. Jane paused. Yes. And Mr. Combs knew nothing of this until afterward. Yes. And yet Garagos pressed your saying he reacted violently. Jane looked her in the eye. I'm saying he treated me like property, and I wasn't his anymore. There was a long pause in the courtroom. Then the prosecutor stepped forward again. Miss Doe, was this the first time Mr. Combs reacted this way? Jane shook her head. No, but it was the first time I didn't apologize. She remembered that moment in her bathroom days after Vegas when Diddy slammed open the doors. He was shouting, accusing, demanding. You're mine, he hissed, grabbing her wrist. I'm not, she whispered back. He slapped the mirror. Glass shattered like her resolve. Back in court, she sat straighter. Not proud, not brave, just done. Let them call it whatever they wanted. A freak-off, a mistake, a betrayal. She knew what it really was. A warning, a crack in the glass, the start of the end. June 19th, 2024. Jane will always remember that date the way survivors remember the second before impact. It wasn't the first time he raised his voice, or the first time doors slammed, mirrors cracked, or accusations flew like knives in the dark. But it was the first time he hit her in the shower, and the last time she thought she could fix him. That morning began with silence. She woke up to the glow of her phone screen and a rising sense of dread. The text from Diddy was simple. We need to talk. I saw your phone. She didn't even have to open the thread to know what he meant. Vegas, the freak-off, Antoine, that flash. The secrets she thought she buried had surfaced. And Diddy, meticulous, paranoid, Diddy had found them all. She barely had time to slide into slippers before the first door broke. The sound was thunder. The force behind it, animal. Her apartment wasn't big, but it felt like a labyrinth when he moved through it. Hunting her, shouting her name, banging fists on every barrier she put between them. Come out here right now. What the F were you thinking? You think you can just humiliate me like that? She tried to stay calm. She locked the bedroom door, then the closet. It didn't matter. One by one, the locks gave way, until it was just her barefoot trembling trapped between the closet wall and his shadow. I didn't do anything, she whispered. Wrong thing to say. He backhanded her once, hard, her vision blurred. She spun on instinct and hit him a desperate slap to the back of his head. His eyes darkened. Something shifted, and then he punched her once, twice. Jane ran. The hallway lights stung her eyes as she stumbled through the apartment, hand over her cheek. Behind her, he followed. Slow, deliberate, like a lion stalking a wounded doe. He caught up by the bathroom door, grabbed her by the hair, dragged her inside. The shower was already running. Steam cloaked the glass, fogging the silver fixtures. She felt the heat as her back hit the cold tiles. No more games, he muttered. He was breathing hard, the kind of breath that came from rage, not exhaustion. She tried to crawl away, slipping on wet porcelain. Then the first slap landed. She hit the shower wall, knees buckling. The second slap knocked her sideways. She collapsed. And then came the third across her jaw. Jane stayed down, not because she gave up, but because she couldn't see straight. Her thoughts spiraled, looping between anger and disbelief, and something like shame. This wasn't love. This wasn't even control. This was punishment. "You think I'm stupid," Diddy spat. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" He paced now outside the shower, soaking wet from the spray, but uncaring. "You go to Vegas. With him. You lie to my face." She whispered, barely audible, "I didn't touch anyone." "But you flashed them," he roared. "You gave them an F show." He kicked the side of the tub. She flinched. Then, as if pulled by some invisible wire, he stopped, looked at her, really looked, and sighed. "We've never fought like this before," he muttered. "And now, this lawsuit, you're attacking me too." She didn't answer, couldn't. Her mouth was bleeding. Later he told her to get dressed, like it was over, like it was normal. He even handed her a towel, as if that made it all okay. In court she recounted all of it, in order, unflinching. She told the jury about the phone calls, how she used his own device to call the girl he was with in Utah. Because yes, there was another woman. Vegas was about her betrayal. Utah was about his. The truth, they were both lying. But only one of them turned it into war. Diddy had summoned his assistant Jonathan. Put him on FaceTime. "Tell her Diddy barked. Tell her that girl isn't coming on the trip." Jonathan had stammered, hesitated, then nodded, saying what he was told to say. Jane saw the truth anyway in the shadows under Jonathan's eyes, in the way he looked away. Still in the courtroom, Jane glanced toward the jury box. Several jurors were scribbling, others just stared. She could feel their eyes asking, "Why did you stay? Why didn't you leave?" The answer was simple. Because she didn't think she could. Because sometimes the cage is made of velvet and words and promises wrapped in gold. And after the shower, the prosecutor asked gently. Jane inhaled. "The violence stopped," she said. But the tension didn't. She remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, hair still dripping, robe clinging to bruised skin. He had changed clothes, buttoned his cuffs, fixed his collar, didn't look at her, didn't say a word, just walked out. "He left me," she told the court, voice trembling now, sitting there, alone, like I was nothing. Her eyes glassed over, not from tears, but from the memory itself, from the chill of that silence, from the echo of his footsteps down the hall. That's when she started to understand. Not that he didn't love her, but that his love was poison, and it was killing her slowly, invisibly behind doors no one else would ever see. Back in her apartment, she'd stared into the mirror above the sink, blood on her lip, finger-shaped bruises on her arm. She reached up to wipe the steam, but before she could, the glass cracked. A thin line, just like her. The next day felt like walking on broken glass barefoot. Jane moved through her apartment with slow, careful steps, as if the walls might remember what they witnessed. The bruises hadn't yet bloomed purple, but they pulsed beneath the skin like shame. She wore long sleeves, even in July. And when her phone buzzed that afternoon with a voice note from Diddy, her hand trembled before pressing play. "You good? Let's have a reset tonight. I'll send Antoine." 3 words that twisted her stomach. Send. Antoine. Tonight? In court, she called it the ritual, a phrase she'd grown to hate, though at one point it had felt like intimacy. After arguments, Diddy didn't apologize. He scheduled. He chose the hotel, the drugs, the people. He called it healing. But it was always the same formula. He broke her, then tested her, then watched to see if she would stay. And she did. Too many times. This night was different, though, because she said no. She remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, feet dangling just above the carpet. Her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm against her thigh. Go to the guest room, he said, not even looking at her. I don't want to. You said you would last time. She hesitated, swallowed. I can't tonight. But Antoine was already there, waiting. As always, Diddy had made sure the pieces were in place before he even asked the question. You know what I want, Diddy said quietly. Stop playing. Jane stood slowly, walked toward the hallway. Every step felt like surrender, but not to desire to duty. In court, she lowered her voice when recalling this part. I didn't want to, but I did. There was silence in the courtroom. Even the pen stopped moving. I performed oral sex. Then I told relive. Usually after those nights, Diddy would come in. They'd lay in bed. He'd stroke her hair, whisper something absurd like, "You're the only one who can handle me," or "We're built from chaos." She used to believe those words were love, broken love. But still love, but not that night. That night, he didn't come in, didn't kiss her forehead, didn't even knock. She waited, curled under the hotel sheets like a child in a haunted house. But the door never opened, and the silence grew louder than any slap ever had. In the morning, the bed was still empty beside her. Jane walked barefoot to the kitchen, the tile cold beneath her toes. Diddy sat at the counter, dressed for the day, phone in hand. He didn't look up, didn't say good morning, didn't ask if she was okay. Just sipped his coffee and scrolled through his texts. Back in court, the prosecutor asked, "How did that make you feel?" Jane's answer came like a breath held too long. It made me feel used. She paused, like a product that had been returned. Later that day, Jane opened her notes app and typed a single line. I miss being loved by someone who didn't need to break me first. She never sent it, never showed it to Diddy, but she read it to the jury, and her voice cracked on the last word. They moved on to the evidence. Screenshots of texts, voice notes, the infamous nickname, again, crackpipe. The room felt heavier with each message, as though the weight of their relationship pressed down on every seat in the courtroom. Diddy's lawyer tried to pivot. Miss Doe, did you ever express affection after these nights? Jane looked up. Yes, I did. Why? The answer came without hesitation. Because I was afraid if I didn't, he'd punish me worse. The prosecutor returned later to ask about the silences. What did it mean when Mr. Combs didn't come to you after a ritual? Jane's lips parted, but no words came at first. Then quietly, it meant I had failed. Failed what herself? Him, the contract they never signed on paper but that she lived inside every day. That night, she went home and deleted every voice memo from Diddy. All except one. The first time he said, "You're mine." She kept it, not out of love, but as a reminder that the chain never rattles until you try to move. At one point in the courtroom, someone sneezed. A soft, human sound in the midst of so much unspoken horror. Jane looked up, eyes watery, but focused. She was still here, still telling it, still unbroken. The chapter closed with a whisper barely audible to anyone but herself. I stopped feeling human when the silence started. Some memories come back with sound. Others return in silence. But the worst ones, the ones that leave marks you cannot trace, come back in vibrations. A buzz on the nightstand. A soft glow in the dark. A message you shouldn't read, but do anyway. July 15th, 2024. Jane was curled up in bed, scrolling through old photos she should have deleted months ago. Her thumb hovered over one from Turk's. Diddy's arm wrapped around her, both of them, smiling, sun-drenched and young. Or pretending to be. And then the phone buzzed. It wasn't Diddy. It was her own voice echoing back in text form. A draft she had written in notes never meant to send. But this time she did. And my dumbass thought that maybe if I fed more and did more hotels, I'd finally get a trip. No emoji, no follow-up. Just that. A message dropped like a rock into still water. In court, the defense lawyer pounced on it. You weren't being forced, she said. Jane didn't flinch. You wanted those nights, didn't you? Jane kept her eyes forward. I wanted a vacation. You wanted the perks. I wanted peace. Miss Doe, the lawyer said, leaning forward, isn't it true you were never afraid of Mr. Combs? Jane turned her head, looked her dead in the eye. I was afraid of what love made me tolerate. Later, the texts continued. August 6th. I'll always mean all the things I say to you. I'm back in love with your ass. Best moments we've ever had together. There it was, the loop, the apology, the reset, the romance. Like a song you didn't ask to hear again, but it plays anyway. Loud, haunting, familiar. And then from Diddy, you hit me with the pill. Jane closed her eyes as the courtroom heard that one. The pill, ecstasy, a mutual ritual now. They both indulged, but only one had power. In testimony, she explained what came next. Another trip, this time to Miami. Diddy's idea, a fresh start. The Four Seasons, ocean views, room service. A love fest, she called it. Soft moments, laughter, drugs, sex. For a few days they played the roles they once believed in. She even mentioned Paul, another escort from the past. Said she missed him. And Diddy smiled. Not because he believed she meant it, but because in that moment he had proof she was still willing to perform. 3 days later, Paul showed up. Jane testified that it was by all definitions consensual. It was fun, she said. But then she added quietly, it felt less like a live performance, more like a group activity. A phrase that didn't land lightly in the courtroom. The prosecutor let it hang, then asked gently, were you happy? Jane hesitated. I was not sad. It wasn't always black and white. Not every encounter was violent. Not every moment was forced. That was the trap, the reason she stayed. Because sometimes, between the bruises, there were diamonds. Because sometimes, he laughed at her jokes, held her hand, promised things no one else dared to. And sometimes, he kept those promises. Back in court, more texts. This time it was Diddy again. A voice memo from December 2023. I don't want to be in a relationship like this. Let's get to solutions. In a graceful, beautiful, loving way. It was a soft voice again, the one that wrapped around her like silk before it strangled. I don't want to waste your life. Jane told the jury what she had told him back then. I feel like I've already wasted 3 years. And then came the note, the one from her phone. A private monologue saved in the quiet hours meant for no one but herself. He promised me trips, dates, romance, just normalcy. But it never came. In the courtroom, Jane read those words aloud. Her voice broke on the word normal, not because it was dramatic, but because she still didn't know what it meant. The prosecutor asked about jealousy. Had she ever envied the other women Jane's head dropped? Her reply came in pieces. They just had more ease. I had more pressure. It was like I was the one who had to carry the impossible. And they didn't. She paused. Then through tears, why do I have to be degraded to be with you gasps again? Not from shock, but because every woman in the room understood what she meant. Not all had lived it, but all had heard that voice, even if it only came from inside. That question, why was I being treated like this, didn't need an answer, because the silence that followed it said more than words ever could. She wiped her eyes, composed herself, and looked toward the jury. They were scribbling furiously. Some looked shaken. Good, she thought. Let them feel it. Just a piece of it. As court adjourned that day, Jane stayed seated a moment longer. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. But she didn't open it. She didn't need to. Because some texts you never forget. She was sitting at the edge of her bed when it hit her. The girls he loved the most never stayed long. They came and went like designer handbags, photographed, admired, replaced. They didn't carry the weight. They didn't take the blame. They weren't the ones forced to clean the blood off the bathroom tiles. In the courtroom, Jane's voice was quieter now, like she was reading from a diary she hadn't planned to share. She told the jury about the other women, The ones who floated through Diddy's life, with grace untouched by his anger, unmarked by his hands. They were lighter, she said. They smiled more. They didn't have to be brave. A pause. I had to be brave. The prosecutors showed the jury a note she had written to herself. Some girls are chosen for display, some for love. I was chosen for damage control. It wasn't poetry. It was survival. The defense lawyer pressed her later. Did he ever force you to stay? Jane blinked. No, she said. But he made it, so I had nowhere else to go. It was around that time that she started talking to herself in the mirror, not for affirmation, not for healing, but to remind herself she was real. You're Jane. You have a mother, a childhood. You are more than a contract. She repeated that like a prayer, even when the bruises faded, especially when they didn't. The court played a second audio message, one the jury hadn't heard before. It was Diddy after she said she was done with hotel nights. What do you want me to do to make you feel better? What should I give you? Let's end this cycle gracefully. Jane's face was unreadable, but her fists clenched slightly in her lap. She told the jury, he said he didn't want to waste my life. But he already had. In that message, Diddy used words like love, grace, solution. But Jane remembered the way he slammed doors more than any of his promises. She remembered how she learned to keep makeup wipes in every room. How she flinched when someone touched her too softly, because softness was always the beginning of something worse. I was the one who stayed, she whispered on the stand. That's why he broke me. There was one night, she told the court, where she almost left. Suitcase packed, Uber called, passport in hand. She was halfway down the hallway of their penthouse when she heard him call her name. Not in anger, not in threat, just Jane. And she froze, like a soldier who'd heard the whistle before the bomb. Back in her room, she wrote another note to herself. Leaving would hurt. Staying might kill me. So I do neither. I exist. The jury was silent now. No scribbling, no shifting. Just silence. Heavy, weighted. The kind that comes when something real enters the room. The prosecutor asked, did you ever love him? Jane smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yes, she said. And I loved the version of me that I thought he saw. She paused, then added, but he didn't see me. He saw what I could survive. The prosecutor nodded gently, then shifted to a final text, one Jane sent to Diddy after the love had turned to rot. I know what you want, baby, but I'm not in the mood for that part, followed by, don't want to make you mad. The courtroom tensed. It was the kind of message that sounds normal, maybe even sweet, until you realize it's laced with fear. Jane testified, I wasn't joking, I meant it, because saying no meant something would break. When asked what exactly broke first, her heart, her will, her sense of self, she gave the most devastating answer of all. My name. By the end of her testimony that day, she was no longer the trembling figure who first took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't stammer. She sat there, composed, contained, like a woman who had already burned and was now speaking from the ashes. She looked at the jury, all 12 of them. Some looked away. Some didn't blink. But she could tell they understood now. She wasn't chasing fame, wasn't bitter, wasn't perfect. She was just the girl he forgot to love right, and who finally remembered herself. Some things you don't forget, the chill of a hotel room. Too expensive to feel that empty. The click of high heels on marble before you step into a night you didn't choose. The weight of a man's gaze as he watches you perform and calls it love. Jane sat on the stand with her shoulders back, spine stiff like a fence holding something wild behind it. I used to pretend I liked it, she said quietly. I told myself if I made it look like pleasure, it wouldn't feel like humiliation. The courtroom didn't move. Even the air seemed to pause. She described the hotel nights in detail, the rules, the sequence, the expectations. How Diddy would book the suite, send a car, sometimes pick the escort himself. How there was always a gift beforehand, a bracelet, a bag of deposit. And then the performance. I stopped being a person, she said. I became an actress, playing a role I didn't audition for. She wasn't just there to satisfy him. She was there to convince herself that she wasn't breaking. And sometimes she almost believed it, until she stopped faking the moans, stopped looking him in the eye, stopped smiling after. I would cry in the bathroom afterwards, she confessed. Turn the faucet on so he wouldn't hear me. One juror wiped his eye. Another just stared at her, jaw clenched. Diddy called it passion, called her his queen. But Jane remembered the moment she realized he wasn't looking at her face during those nights. He was watching the recording, the angles, the way she moved, the way she pretended. Did you ever say no, the prosecutor asked? Jane nodded, at first, and then I learned what happened when I said no. A beat. What happened? Jane turned her eyes to the floor. He stopped speaking to me, or worse, he made me prove my loyalty. There was one night she told him when Diddy brought in a new escort, someone Jane had never met. He turned the camera on, told her to put on a show. She tried to speak, tried to say she wasn't comfortable. But he cut her off. Baby, you know how this goes. The film rolled, and so did she. I didn't orgasm, Jane told the jury, not once. There was silence. I faked it, every time, because it was the only thing I could control. The prosecutor brought up Paul, the escort Jane once said she missed. Did you truly miss him? Jane smiled faintly, bitterly. I missed who I was before I needed him. Then came Cabral, the one who tried to extort her, the one who threatened to leak footage unless she paid $10,000. She said Diddy promised to take care of it. He didn't. The tape was sold. She never saw it again. I still don't know where it ended up, she whispered. But I think about it every time I walk into a room. And then the voice memo. Another one. Diddy's voice warm and low. Let's find a way to end this beautifully. I don't want you to feel like I wasted your life. Jane's lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. Finally, she said, he didn't waste it. He rewrote it. The prosecutor nodded slowly, gently pressing forward. Did you ever feel like you had a choice? Jane turned her head, looked out toward the hallway, the one she once tried to escape down with a suitcase in hand. No, she said. Because love shouldn't make you forget who you are. That night after court, Jane sat in her hotel room and opened her laptop. Typed out a letter she never sent. You said I was your everything. But what you meant was, I was everything you could ruin. She saved it, just in case she ever forgot. The next morning in court, the prosecutor had one last question. Miss Doe, if you could forget every hotel night, would you? Jane didn't hesitate. I wish I could. And with that, she stepped down from the witness stand, not in defeat, not in fear, but with the kind of strength that's forged when you've survived love in its most violent disguise. The hallway outside the courtroom was warmer than she remembered. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the floor. Jane stood still for a moment, watching dust dance in the golden light, delicate, unbothered, free. She didn't feel free, not yet, but she felt something else. Lighter. Her testimony was over. 5 odd days. That's how long she had sat beneath the eyes of strangers, unraveling 3 years of silence. She had been prodded, picked apart, doubted, humiliated. But she had told it all. And now she was still standing. She walked slowly down the corridor, passing a line of reporters held back by security ropes. Flashes clicked, heads turned. But no one shouted her name, because no one knew it. She was still just Jane Doe. And yet for the first time in years, she felt named by herself. Back in the courtroom, Diddy remained seated, stone-faced. His lawyers whispered, scribbled, shuffled papers. He didn't look at her as she passed. He never did when he knew she was winning. The prosecutor had said, "We're done." But Jane wasn't. Not quite. Because memory is its own kind of courtroom. And the verdict comes in waves long after the trial ends. That night, she returned to her apartment. The one he used to pay for. the one she now paid for herself. She took off her shoes by the door, tied her hair into a bun, poured herself a glass of water, and sat in silence. No music, no buzzing phone, no voice notes calling her CP. Just stillness. And then instinctively she picked up her phone and opened the Notes app. A blank page. She didn't plan the words, they just came. I used to believe that love meant sacrifice. But now I know if it costs your voice, your body, your memory, it's not love. It's a spell. And I'm finally waking up. She saved it. Didn't send it. Didn't need to. In court, she had talked about the other girls, the ease they had, the freedom, the way their laughter didn't carry bruises underneath. She wasn't jealous anymore. She pitied them. Because most of them never knew what was coming. She did. And still she stayed. There had been a moment just before she stepped down from the stand when Diddy looked at her. Just briefly. And in that look, she saw it. Not remorse, not anger, but vacancy. The same emptiness he carried through every ritual, every fight, every performance. And she realized then, he never saw her. He saw what he could control. She once thought love was being chosen. But now she knew being chosen isn't love. It comes with a leash. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. She let it ring. Didn't even check who it was from, because she knew what it would say. I miss you. Or, let's fix this. Or, I didn't mean to hurt you. She knew the script. She had lived it long enough to memorize every line. Instead, she stood up, walked to her bathroom mirror, looked at her reflection. No bruises today. No tears. Just Jane. She reached for the mirror cleaner, sprayed, wiped, watched as the glass cleared. And there she was. Not as his crackpipe, not as CP, not as the forgotten girl in the notes, but as herself. Somewhere a podcast was still playing. Somewhere a lawyer was still arguing. Somewhere Diddy's defense team was drafting the next move. But none of that was her concern anymore, because the worst part wasn't over. But her part was. And that had to be enough for now. In one of Diddy's old voice memos, he had said, "Let's end this beautifully." She used to wonder what that meant. Now she knew sometimes ending beautifully means walking away with nothing. Except the truth. She picked up her phone again, opened the last voice memo he ever sent her, pressed delete, then closed her eyes and breathed.